Hi, it's Dr. Tiffany. So today's topic is going to be on enabling behaviors. So we ask ourselves the question, am I an enabler? Do I enable other people's behaviors? A couple blogs ago, I talked about how we change our own behaviors. Today, we're going to talk more about how to shape the behaviors of others. So we're going to start with the basics, okay? We're going to work with positive reinforcement, otherwise known as operant conditioning. That's when somebody does an awesome behavior, a good behavior that you like, you give them reward for it, whether it's praise, whether it's a bonus at work, or whether it's a lollipop when it's your child and they're doing great. So we all love operant conditioning. It's found to be the most effective form of behavioral change because people like to please other people, but we also love to have rewards, right? Okay, so that's positive reinforcement. Then there's negative reinforcement. And that's when we have an aversive stimuli occurring and we want to get away from it, kind of like escaping it, all right? So, for example, if an alarm goes off in my office right now and it just continues to beat down on me and it's too much to hear, I will leave the room, right? Leaving the room, that action is actually considered negative reinforcement, okay, because I am leaving an aversive stimuli. So let's talk a little bit about children. So I have a 3-year-old son. I don't know if you really consider that a toddler anymore, but he's definitely in that age where he's testing limits and testing boundaries. And sometimes when he doesn't get his way and I'm in a grocery store or I'm really busy doing something, he'll be screaming and crying, kind of trying to get my attention, really just being naughty and completely unruly. Sometimes I'll be like, here, just put this sucker in your mouth so you be quiet. So giving him the sucker was negative reinforcement because I was trying to stop his aversive behavior that I didn't like. Okay, so essentially, I rewarded his behavior, his bad behavior, with a sucker. Does it teach him the right thing? No, it doesn't. All right, so that's negative reinforcement. Now let's go on to punishment. Okay, when we punish somebody, we're adding a negative consequence to their lifestyle. Okay, so with a child, let's talk about a toddler again. Of course, if you give them a spanking or a verbal reprimand, we're adding something additional that is negative for them. Okay, so that is considered a punishment. All right, so when we think of punishment, it is not considered the best way to maintain any kind of good behavior that we want from a child, okay, or any other person. If we want really good and clear behavioral change, what we're going to do is focus primarily on positive reinforcement. Punishment works short term, okay, but over time it becomes extinct, the results of those behaviors. What continues to maintain is that positive reinforcement and that operant conditioning. You know you love it yourself, right? Okay, so how are we enablers, right? Sometimes the most important thing we need to do in our interpersonal relationships in life is set healthy boundaries. All the time I hear people come in and talk about, marital issues, right? What's going on in my marriage, and we're constantly arguing and we're constantly fighting and we're finding ourselves going down rabbit holes. I mean, I found myself doing that in my marriage and in other arguments with family members. What how did we end up here, right? So if we continue to reinforce one another's behavior, essentially fueling fire with fire, right? We're just going to go all over the place in an argument and get nowhere and resolve nothing. And then we're just dispersing negative energy into our homes and our environment that everyone can feel, and it's totally toxic and it's unhealthy. So if you find yourself going down a rabbit hole with your partner, don't fuel fire with fire, okay? It's not going to get you anywhere. So kind of just stop. Don't let it continue. Maybe you need to set some rules of engagement with that relationship, saying, hey, if we're reaching this threshold, I'm going to call a timeout, or you're going to call a timeout, so that we can kind of reconvene and let our frontal lobes kind of cool down so that we can think more clearly going forward. But if we keep fueling each other with that negativity, it's just going to become super toxic and we're going to go down a rabbit hole and kind of miss the point of the argument. Nothing's going to get resolved. So don't feed the fire. Just don't feed it. Don't give in. Don't do it, right? I have to learn that myself because sometimes I can want to have my way sometimes, right? And get stubborn. But sometimes I have to practice what I preach. The other day, my husband was like, I was stressing out about something. I'm always stressing about something. Babe, you gotta just breathe, like what you do on your vlogs, you tell people to deep breathe. Why don't you practice what you do? I was like, oh my goodness, now these vlogs are coming to haunt me, right? So I got to practice what I preach. So don't fight fire with fire, especially in relationships. So for in the workplace too, and I have been an enabler in the workplace, you always say yes, 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 yes. And consequently, you really don't set boundaries for yourself, right? It's like then you get inundated by work and it's unpleasant. So, can we say yes, but maybe setting a boundary? So, instead of everybody feeding you all of the taskers that they want you to do, rather say yes, but it will get done within this time period. And then you kind of set, expectation for what gets done that's reasonable without you stressing out, but kind of meets or maybe even just exceeds a little bit the requirements that you're supposed to do. But saying no sometimes and setting that boundary is super important. Once they get the fact that we're a yeser, they just don't stop, right? Okay, so there's that. Let's see. Oh, yes, and here's another one where I'm an enabler. Actually, my husband and I are both enablers sometimes. But like I said, I have a 3-year-old, and so he is trying to figure out how he's going to sleep by himself, right? And of course, he wants to join mommy and daddy. He's an only child, so it's like mommy and daddy are sleeping in the same bed. Why am I sleeping alone, right? He didn't have any like siblings to model. So there was this one point where maybe we felt guilty, and then we let him come in the bed, and then we're like, well, then he needs. He kicks me out of the bed, quite frankly. He like tosses and turns in every direction, and I don't get a good night's sleep, and I end up in another room. So that's just not cool. So we were like, okay, well, maybe we just need to bed train him, where he just kind of just stays in his own bed. But he keeps creeping out. And I used to say yes, just to kind of placate the situation, to let him crawl into my bed with us. But then I realized I was getting kicked out every single night, and I can't do that anymore. I need to have my own sanity. I do a lot, and so I need to be functioning and sleep well. So finally, I was like, okay, no, I have to stay up with him if he's going to cry through this. It takes a lot more work to sculpt the right behavior than it is to acquiesce or to give in, right? Sometimes it means holding back, right? And sometimes it also means in sculpting a behavior, maybe we hold back some of what we tend to do, whether it's in arguments. But sometimes we also have to push forward and set a limit and set a boundary, like I was doing with my son or doing at work, or if somebody's treating me in a certain way that I don't like, I have to set that limit too, right? I don't want to continue to enable that behavior. We have to think too that enabling behaviors comes in the form of health, right? If you have a loved one and you want to make sure that they're eating healthy, that they don't get a heart attack or heart disease or this or that, we can't continue to enable the behavior of unhealthy eating because it placates them and satiates them in the moment. If it means that they have to go on a diet and they're going to be a bit cranky, maybe we need to tolerate that so that we can reach the long-term goal at the end, which is health for all, right? Okay. So that's enough on that part of enabling behaviors. But what's so important when we're trying to sculpt behaviors with other people, whether it be working with patients, whether it be working with our spouses, working with our children, working as a teacher, you name it, when we reward people, it just goes the furthest. If we're consistent with that reward and that praise, it goes even further. Let's go back to the 5 love languages that I talked about a while back. So what amazing positive reinforcement it is when we find the right love language for a person, right? And if we continue to reinforce it in their language, wow, it won't just resonate to one degree, it'll take it to another level and have a lot more impact, which is super cool. So don't forget, consistency is key, and I gotta be consistent at night with my son and setting boundaries and those limits, even if it requires me staying up a little longer. The effects work. For the most part now, he's in his bed and he understands. He wants to sleep with the door open. We came to a compromise and we were reasonable, but it works out, so we're both happy. The last thing is, and I think this works a lot for married couples or people in relationships, is to applaud the things and tell the person that you're with, tell them the things you like about them, right? Let's go back to the laws of attraction now. We went earlier back to the 5 love languages. Let's go revisit the laws of attraction, right? We attract what we put out. So if we're putting out positive energy, naturally we're going to attract positive energy. So if we're saying the good things that we like from our partner or spouse, okay, clearly that's going to come right back to us because human beings tend to want to please. The more we point out all the things we don't like, the more that's going to come back to us as well. The same thing goes with our children when we navigate that relationship. If we're constantly hounding them and hassling them, then they're not going to want to please because nothing they do is right. So remember, point out the good things, and even the bad things, kind of minimize them, okay? Just minimize the bad things for a hot minute and recognize all the good that's happening. And I promise you, it will come back to you, and you will notice a change in your partner's behavior and even your behavior when it comes to your outlook. All right, so that's about it for enabling behaviors. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please put them down below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for your time, and I pray you push the love forward.